Oh,
Welcome.
welcome, welcome. Hey, Lara. Lara, hello. She's not hearing yet.
250.
Welcome, Amy and Dawn.
Hello.
Dawn, we can.
Feel free to put your cameras on if you'd like to, and to unmute if you'd like to, unless you've got a racket going on behind you. It's fine. Either way is fine, whatever you want. But it's always great to see people, so I know whether I'm making sense or not. If I get all confused, like, what? That's very helpful to know, you know.
Have a few more folks joining us.
Give it a couple more minutes.
I think we're probably good to start, Connie.
Okay. Okay.
Let me pull up my screen.
Okay. That'd be great. Start the PowerPoint. We'll be in business. Awesome. There you go. Great. Well, welcome everyone. It is a real pleasure to be here with you this morning to talk about grant funding, foundations, research, and in particular, ways that you can make your proposals stand out and be even more successful. So I'm assuming that some of you probably have some prior experience in grant writing and research and dealing with foundations. I see a few nodded heads, which is great. As you thought about signing up for this class today, if there's anything in particular that you thought of where you said, gee, I hope they talk about this, or I would really love to learn that, feel free to put it in the chat. Or as we go along, if you have a question, just interrupt me and ask the question, because I'd love for you to have any specific learning interest that you have today to be answered and covered. I have been writing and reviewing grant proposals for probably definitely for decades. So I have a lot of experience, not only in terms of developing programs and creating successful grant proposals, but also in reviewing them and wearing the other hat, that of the grant maker. So we're going to talk a bit this morning about how to make your proposals stand out from the grant maker's perspective, the kinds of things that are important to them, because we often don't think about that. I think we often think about, oh, I hope I get the money, or my organization really needs this, or, how can I write this proposal really well? We often don't step back and think, well, what are the questions the funder is really asking? What do they need to hear from us? So we're going to talk about that a little bit. Want to go to the next slide, Beth?
Yeah.
So as you know, because you're all part of 250 in some way, shape, or form, this is a program that is provided by the Chesco 250 Initiative, sponsored by the Chester County Community Foundation. So there's just a few slides at the beginning of the PowerPoint that sort of review the basic tenets and concepts of 250. Next slide. So this is just a reminder about the mission and the aims of the Chesco 250 Initiative, which basically is about celebrating and commemorating the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence, as you know, and trying to foster community interest in activities and engagement throughout the county and beyond, with a hope of having continuing and increased civic engagement afterwards. Next slide. And these are some of the basic themes, which I'm sure you're going to want to be using in your grant proposals to educate the funder a little bit about what Chesco 250 is all about. And all of this information is stuff that's free for you to use, to put in your boilerplates and to put in any kinds of proposals that you might develop. Next slide. And this talks about the 4 heritage themes, which again may play a very prominent role in some of your grant proposals, particularly if you're applying to a funder in one of these specific areas where you might be able to pinpoint, here's a reason why you might be particularly interested in this proposal. Did you know your business or your foundation is located right in the middle of the path to freedom, where a lot of activities occurred in over our history, or that you're located right in the middle of the path of the Philadelphia campaign. So these kinds of things might be useful for you to use. Next slide. All right. And this just covers briefly citizenship rights, citizenship responsibilities, and again, things that you might want to put into a grant proposal. And I'm sure you're well familiar with all of these. Next slide. And this is just a summary of the timeline for Chesco 250 activities. You can see we're here in the first quarter of 2025 with a goal of July 2026. And so there's a variety of we've got some time, but there's a lot to do, as you can see, based on this timeline. It'll be here before we know it, probably. Next slide. Okay. So next, that's the pause from the 250 stuff. And next slide, we'll go into the topic for today. And if you can skip that one, also, we'll go right over into grant funding overview. So these are the basic topics that we're going to cover today. As I mentioned earlier, we're going to talk about what funders look for when they evaluate grant requests, how to think like a funder, what kinds of projects are going to be most likely to be most successful for foundation asks in particular. So our purview today is primarily private foundations and corporate foundations, and maybe grant making initiatives as part of another organization, for example. And we'll touch a tiny bit on government funding. We'll talk about research, kinds of tools to use, and sort of some research basic tips, because again, I'm sure most of you are pretty familiar with a lot of that. And we'll talk a lot about how to write a good proposal, the different components of a proposal. We'll talk about budgets and attachments, outcomes and evaluation. We'll talk about how to use your network to strengthen your proposals, because that continues to be a really effective way to enhance your funding probability. And we'll talk about site visits, ethics, accountability, reporting, and stewardship. Great. So let's move on to just thinking about what do funders look for when evaluating grant requests. Funders, when funders are reading your grant proposals, they have several things they need to keep in mind. First is evaluating your proposal to discern whether what you're asking for fits their mission and their guidelines and what they want to give the money to. Generally speaking, they have bylaws and they will have a trust agreement that they have to follow, regardless of how wonderful your proposal is. If it doesn't fit in to the concepts in the trust document, they aren't going to be able to make the grant. So that first off is what they're thinking about. Secondly, funders are investors, and we often don't think about them that way, but just like your major individual donors who are investing in the work of your organization, foundation executives, corporate grant making people, and people stewarding money in an organization are all potential investors in your organization. So they are wearing the hat of, how strong is this organization? Are they a worthy investment opportunity? If we give them this money, are they going to stay in business long enough to do the program they say they will? And are they going to be able to deliver the program that they say they will? Do they have the capacity to do it? So the first set of things that a funder looks at in terms of evaluating an organization's strength is good governance, functioning bylaws, having strong functioning committees. That is a sign of a strong, well-developed nonprofit. Best practice policies in place, reviewing those policies, a diverse and active board. You need to have a large enough board of directors so that that communicates to the funder that there are a lot of people invested in this organization. There are a lot of people looking at what's going on. If you have a board of 3 or 4 people, that is not going to inspire confidence in a funder. These days, you need at least 10 or 12 people on a board to communicate to a funder, yeah, there's really good oversight and stewardship going on in this organization. You need active volunteers because that communicates that the community is invested in what you do. Because a funder may say, well, if the community doesn't care, why should I? And that's another reason why having every member of your board of directors be donors to your organization is really, really important. Because a funder is going to say, well, hey, if the board isn't willing to give, why should we give? If they're not convinced and sold on what they're doing, why should we care? So these are all things that communicate strength and investment and a capable nonprofit. Also, these days, funders expect to see a strategic plan. And they also would like to know that you're actively working on it, that it's not just sitting in a computer somewhere. So they may ask you a question about how often do you look at your strategic plan? Now, these days, most proposals, as you know, are done on online grant formats that are on the computer. They're online. They're not written. We're not doing multi-page written proposals anymore, by and large. There are still a few foundations that will accept those and want those, but by and large, they're online formats. And you're very limited by what you can kind of communicate, what kind of information you can communicate based on the questions that the format that the system asks. So they may not ask you all of these questions specifically. There are a few foundations that will, but they may not. In which case it's important, if you have some strengths, these areas are strengths of yours, incorporate it somehow into the narrative. Incorporate this information. If you have a very active board and 100% of them donate to the organization and they're reviewing the strategic plan every couple of months, figure out a place where you can put a sentence or two in about that to communicate that to the funder. The other thing a funder looks at, in addition to organizational stewardship and stability and strength, is fiscal stability. So, because again, they want to be sure that if they give you a $20,000 restricted grant for a specific project or to buy a piece of equipment, that you're not going to turn around and use it to fund your deficit, or that you're not going to turn around and use it for operating expenses because your budget is tight. So they look for, are there any repeated deficits? Have you had a deficit in the last couple of years? An indication of organizational strength today is if you have an operating reserve fund of at least 9 to 12 months. We used to say 3 to 6 months, but if there's one thing that COVID taught us in the nonprofit world, it's that we need savings accounts. We need some kind of liquid cash to sustain us when things go south, as they did certainly during COVID. So having some kind of a fiscal reserve is an indicator of a sign of strength. And also, if your organization does have debt service, that it's small enough amount so that it's not going to impact your ability to deliver your programs. So those are all indicators of strength: organizational governance strength and fiscal strength. The funders also, once they've done that kind of due diligence, also going to look at your project. And they're going to have multiple questions in their head as they read your proposal. And as I mentioned earlier, the most primary one is, does it fit what our foundation is set up to do? But then they're going to talk, and if it does, then they're going to go down to, well, is this really an important project? And how well thought out is it? Are the objectives realistic and doable? Are the things that they say really something that they have the ability to do? And here the funder is assessing, if we give them this money, can they deliver what they say they're going to do? And the way that you convince the funder, yeah, we're ready for this, is you have a really solid plan. You communicate to them how this is totally within your capacity. You've done this kind of stuff before, maybe not this specific thing, but you have this capability to do this. And that it is you really thought it through. You've got a really good set of goals and objectives that are reasonable. You know you're going to be able to evaluate it. You know you're going to be able to tell the funder after the project is done, yes, here's what we accomplished. That you have a realistic budget. And again, having a really solid, good budget is another way of communicating to the funder, we've thought this through. We get it. We know what we're going to need. We're a reliable program deliverer. We know how to buy this piece of equipment, or we know how to manage this renovation, or we know how to do this set of programs. So those are all things that you also need to convince the funder that you're really have a good project and you're ready to roll. Why is all this stuff important? Basically, as we all know, nonprofit fundraising today is extremely competitive. Everybody's asking for money, everybody has a grant writer, or everybody's doing grant writing. And the reality is, in terms of history and the arts, is still and yet many foundations are focused on funding basic human needs: food, clothing, shelter, and healthcare. Now, there are, thankfully, foundations and other funding arms that are focused on giving to history, which is wonderful. And so you're not competing against a local healthcare center or a food bank. However, there are many organizations that have very broad giving guidelines, and the guideline might be, we just fund things to make the Chester County community better, in which case your initiatives would certainly fit, and that's the kind of competition you're up against. So you need to be as strategic as you possibly can when you're doing your proposals, and look for anything you can find to make yourself stand out. Anything, something unique about your case. If you have a board member who knows someone at the foundation, or knows someone who knows someone at the foundation, try to develop a relationship with a funder however you can. Next slide. So let's just, consider you've thought all of that through. Let's get started. So the first thing that I think is really helpful when you want to do grant writing and grant funding is to develop a really big list, as big a list as you can, of all the projects that you need to get funding for. It could be a program, it could be a capital renovation, it could be a piece of equipment. The broader you can be in the variety of projects, the more likely you're going to be able to find a funder that's going to fit that project. So you want to think about also what's unique about your organization. Is there anything? Brainstorm this with other people in your organization. Don't just sit at the computer and stare and go, oh, well, what do we do that's unique? Well, I don't know. Get your board together, get your volunteers together, get people together who are donating to you, and ask them, why do you donate to us? What's special about us? What do we do that's different? Because you really want to be leading with that as you apply for funding. If you serve a unique population that isn't served by anybody else, if you're in a geographic area that isn't served by anybody else, anything you can think of that is going to make you a little bit different is going to help you to be successful. And again, try to bring as many people as you can into this conversation. So the best kind of fundraising, where I've seen fundraising really succeed in organizations, is when everybody's pulling together and it really is a team effort. So get a lot of people together, because they're going to have different viewpoints, different experiences, and they may come up with things that you might not be able to. Next slide. So once you've developed your list of projects, the kinds of things we want money for, you have a sense of how much you need for a certain thing, and you have a sense of, is this capital or a project or whatever. Now you need to start researching to match your projects up with a funder. And thankfully, we have some fabulous tools that are available to us to make this searching pretty direct and efficient. But it's really important that you do this step very, very carefully. Some funder guidelines are very specific. They'll be very, very specific about what they fund, what size organization they fund, all of that. Some are very, very broad. Government funding programs tend to be extremely specific. And you can see here are some various tools on the PowerPoint that are available to you to make your research a little easier. That first one is a list of foundations that the Chesco 250 through the Chester County Community Foundation have broadly vetted as being funders that might be interested in looking at your projects. They've been screened to be funders that will fund civic engagement initiatives, history, things of that sort. There's a couple federal and government grant links. And if you're interested in government grants, I would really recommend you contact Karen at the Community Foundation, because there are a few staffers there who have Karen and a couple staffers actually have been going out and meeting with all the elected officials in Chester County about this initiative. And they've been talking about government funding programs that might be available to fund projects. So that would be a really good first place for you to start if you're interested in trying to get some local or state funding. The very best resource that I can suggest to you for private foundations is the Regional Foundation Center, and we are blessed to have one at the Chester County Library in Exton. And there are some wonderfully fabulous librarians there who run the research center who can help you every step of the way go through using their databases. There are these very powerful, huge databases that list every private foundation in the country. And you can get all kinds of information from researching these foundations, from where are they located, what do they fund, what size grants will they accept, how many grants do they fund in your particular area, all kinds of information, not to mention the names of their board of directors, and the specific guidelines and how to approach them. So that if you're new to this, or you need to brush off your list, that's well worth a trip to Exton to hang out with them for a while. Let's see, what else? So it's very important that you do this research really carefully. And if research is not your thing, if staring at a computer screen for hours on end is not your thing, find someone in your organization who can help you with it, for whom it would be a fun project to do. I mean, there are people who really love doing this stuff and downloading things and creating Excel files and storing information. But get someone who's going to have the patience, or divide it up with several people. It does take time. I don't want to sugarcoat this. It does take time, but it's well worth the time that you're going to put into it. So what you want to look for in any of these databases, any of these research tools, is you first want to look for a regional match. So you want to find a funder that's willing to fund in Chester County. They don't have to be in Chester County. I mean, as you probably know, there are many foundations in the 5-county area and beyond in Pennsylvania, and even beyond Pennsylvania, that do fund in Chester County. But be sure that they're willing to make grants in Chester County. Because if their focus is on Philadelphia, no matter how good a programmatic match they are, they're not going to entertain your proposal. The next thing is you want to find the subject match. So if you want to find, is it history? Is it civic engagement? Is it, what's the hook? What's the topic that you're promoting with your project? And then you need to look for one that will fund that type of project. Is it a capital project? Is it a project? Is it just a project, a program that you want funded? Is it a piece of equipment that you want funded? So then you have to keep narrowing this down to finding, yeah, he's in there. They fund in Chester County. They like history. And yes, they will fund equipment if you're looking for equipment, for example. And then once you've got that list created, that becomes your priority prospect list. And just a word about some of these large foundations that we do have in our area, such as Pew and William Penn and Longwood Foundation in Delaware. These large foundations all have very, very specific agendas. The challenge is everybody knows about them or hears about them. So you might have a board member or a volunteer coming at you and saying, oh, we should apply to Pew to get some money. They'll give us money. They give everyone money. And you'll need to go, well, no, they aren't interested in this. So you need to learn what their guidelines are and be ready to be kind but firm when someone says, oh, I know somebody who used to work there 20 years ago, we should be able to get funding from them. I've heard that a lot, which is why I'm saying it. But they all have very specific agendas. And again, just because they're large, it doesn't mean they give to everyone. And in these big foundations, any connections you might have with your board may have very limited value because they're very staff-driven organizations. But the nice thing is that they do have generally informational sessions for grant seekers. Longwood in particular has that, where you can go to an online meeting and hear about how they fund, what they fund, how to approach them, and even ask questions. some of the less formal ones, such as in Delaware, Welfare and Crystal, that also fund up here, Crystal Trust, that also fund in Pennsylvania, are a little less formal, and they might, or the Phoenixville Community Health Foundation, for example, is another one where they will give you a pre-application meeting. They'll allow you to actually meet with someone and talk about your project and get feedback. If you can get those kinds of meetings, those are fabulous, because those meetings will tell you very quickly whether you're in the ballpark or not, and you can also get tips on how to be more effective. So that's sort of just some tips about dealing with super large foundations. And again, you want to make this list of foundations that are good subject and project matches. And then you want to add in the names of the trustees and the decision makers to that list. And you want to share that list with everyone on your board, on your committees, your friends, your visitors, your colleagues, everyone you can think of, to see if anybody knows anyone. And so if someone does have a connection at a foundation or an organization that makes grants, or a corporation, someone knows someone who works in a corporation, you want to target those first, because they're going to be your best shots. Next slide.
Oops, sorry.
That's okay. We're good. Are you good?
There we go.
There we are. Thank you. So you figured out who you're going to be writing to. Let's just talk a little bit about proposal writing tips. The basic concept with proposal writing, unless you are writing to an organization or a funder that is specifically a high-powered history funding organization, is simple, direct writing without jargon. If you're writing to a general funder, or even someone who's interested in funds history, but they're not a PhD history person themselves, and you can tell that through your research, we really have to keep the writing simple and basic. And history, like so many other fields, is rampant with its own jargon. You know, education is rampant with jargon, right? Medicine, mental health is like, oh my goodness, every next word is an acronym. And the problem with it is, unless you work in that field, you don't know what people are saying. The purpose of your proposal is to create a bridge between your organization and the person with the money. That's the purpose of the proposal. If you use words that people don't understand, you're not creating a bridge, you're creating a barrier. And the reader, foundations, again, foundation staff are overwhelmed with a million proposals. They're looking for any reason to discard your proposal or to say, this is too much work, I can't figure it out. They obviously don't care enough to explain what they're doing to the average person. So that goes in the no pile. However, it's very tough if you're working in a particular field. It's very tough to identify jargon because you use it all the time and you think everybody understands it. So what I recommend you do is be conscious of this as you're writing your proposal. If you really have to use an acronym, spell it out, make it very clear what it means. And then when you're done drafting the proposal, ask someone outside of your organization who knows nothing about what you do to read it. And they will very, very quickly pick up on things that are confusing, that don't make sense. So ask your children or your partner or your neighbor or your parents or whoever you can find, your babysitter, to read this thing and say, does this make sense to you? Because that will very quickly help you to pull out anything that's confusing or not compelling. What you really need to do here is try to paint a picture of what it is that you want funding for. Real people like you and I, are going to read these proposals. You really need to help them understand what you're doing. You want to give examples of the successes you have, things you've experienced doing other programs. We sparked an interest in history in an otherwise sullen 15-year-old, or we educated people about what occurred in the past in their communities, or we talked about freedom leaders who championed causes that may be meaningful for them today, and it gave them a new understanding of why history is important. So you want to explain something about that in some way will create a picture for the funder about why your project is going to be effective. And with the online proposal formats today, as many of you know, most of the questions have either word limits or character limits to them. So generally speaking, less is going to be more, because there's a reason they have those limits, because they don't have the patience and the time to read endless essays. Next slide. So basically, all proposals, whether they're paper proposals or online proposal formats, all need to include basically the same stuff. It may be labeled differently in an online proposal format, but basically all of it is pretty much what I'm going to be talking about, just so you know the different parts of a proposal and what you need to be prepared to do. So the first thing is to review the guidelines very carefully, so that you really are remembering and understanding what this particular funder needs and wants. There will be some form of a cover sheet. If it's a paper proposal, there'll be a paper cover sheet of your just demographic information. If it's an online format, it'll be multiple screens asking for names and addresses and EIN numbers and budget size and board chair and all of those kinds of simple information. Then some proposals, we're going to want you to give them an overall proposal summary. And the purpose of this, of course, is so the reader can, in a paragraph or two, grasp what it is you want and very quickly make a judgment. Are they in the pile? Am I going to put this in the pile of, yeah, I'm going to read further? Or am I kicking them out? Does this not fit for us? Sometimes funders will have a letter of intent process also, which basically will comprise the cover sheet and a summary and maybe a little bit more information. And that's submitted first to allow the funder to figure out, are we interested in learning more or not? And then they'll get back to you and they will say, yeah, we really want a full proposal and here's what you need to send us, or no, thank you. But I recommend you write the summary. If this is in a full proposal format, you write the summary after you've written the whole proposal, because then you're simply going to be able to grab sentences or a paragraph here or there from the proposal that you've already written. It'll be a lot easier. Most funders are going to want to hear about your history and your mission. They're going to want your mission statement. They're going to want to know, how long you've been around and some personal information about your organization. And this is a place for you to really talk about how fabulous you are. It's the grant writing and fundraising are not times to keep those lights under the bushel. It's the time to really talk about how unique you are, how special you are. If you've done anything, if you won awards, have you, are you leaders in championing a certain kind of knowledge or understanding or initiatives? Anything you can put in there, again, to help make you stand out. Then one of the most important parts of your proposal is communicating the need, making the case for why your program needs to happen and who's going to benefit from it. And we often get into thinking about the organization has a need. We need a new copy machine. We need a new van. But the need here is not about the organization. It's about the people you serve who have the need. So the people who come to our workshops need to have handouts from our programs. So therefore, we can't give them to them because we don't have a copy machine. Or we love doing programs for after school kids, but we can't get them here because we don't have a van. It's not that we don't have a van, it's that the kids need to get to us, and therefore we need the van. We have historic, it's not that we need a new HVAC system in our building. It's that the historic artifacts that we're storing and stewarding and curating are not being cared for in the proper way. Therefore, we need the HVAC system. So you want to talk about in this needs section, who's going to benefit in human terms if that's applicable. It's not that we can do 15 more educational programs. It's that we can educate hundreds of more children who don't have access to local history education. And wherever you can, and this is one place where historic organizations I think would do great, is you want to cite statistics and research to back up your assertion. To say that here are reasons why history education for children is important. And you can back that up with citations, which is really helpful. You also, once you've laid out this problem, you could call it the problem or the need. Once you've laid this out, now you get into, we have a solution. I've sold you on the problem. And that's really the crux of the proposal in a lot of ways. It's you're selling the reader that there's an issue. And now you're selling them that we've got a solution to the issue. So you're going to talk about how you're going to meet the need. You know, we're going to build a heritage center. We're going to provide these 15 programs for kids based on certain curriculum. We're going to do a renovation to allow us to accommodate hundreds and hundreds of more people throughout the year. So you want to be real specific about what you're going to do, who's going to do it. If it's a renovation, you want to talk about how your organization is qualified to manage a renovation. Who are you going to use as a contractor or as architects? Who's going to teach your workshops? What are their qualifications? How long is it going to take? The timelines. When will it start? When will it finish? You want to, again, you're letting the funder know here, we've thought this through. Remember, we talked about that at the beginning, that that's a concern that funders have is, do you have a solid project? Do you have a plan? Well, here you're describing what your plan is, and you're instilling your credibility that, yeah, we figured this out. We know how to do this. This is what it's going to be. We've considered all the angles. And then today, outcomes are very important. Funders want to know what's the return on investment, or what's going to happen as a result of your project. Just delivering the project or doing the renovation isn't enough. They want to know what change has occurred, what's happened as a result of this. So it relates back to your need. What needs are going to be met as a result of your initiative? If you're clear about describing your need, then coming up with some outcomes is going to be fairly smooth. Outcomes need to be measurable and quantifiable. There's two types, basically. Measurable and quantifiable, they're objective outcomes, which is the number of people you are now serving, the number of workshops you delivered, the money that you've saved because you now have more efficient equipment, anything like that. And then there are subjective outcomes, which is how have people, or has the issue that you're addressing been made better? So this is a little tight. It's a little more difficult to measure sometimes, but this is where we use pre and post surveys, or we get evaluation forms from people at the end of a workshop. How effective was this? If it's school classes, you could talk to teachers afterwards and say, what kinds of things did the kids say on the bus? Do you notice any changes in the children who attended these programs? Those kinds of things. So there's objective and subjective. And you're going to be, when you report back to the foundation on the grant, say at the end of the year or the grant year, you're going to be reporting on these outcomes. So you want to be really careful to make them realistic and achievable. Because you don't want to say you don't want to promise the moon and then only be able to deliver a small piece of it. So be very realistic as you're doing the outcomes. Talk with the people who are delivering the programs and say, does this make sense? Are we going to be able to do this? Because you don't want to be like going humma when you have to write the report back to the funder. And then lastly, there's an evaluation component, which is basically telling the funder, how are we going to know that we've met the outcomes? I remember years ago meeting with a funder, and I was sitting there talking about an after-school program, and I was telling her about what a great after-school program it was. And the program person was there with me as well. And she was saying, oh, and we know these kids grow so much and they learn so much, and it's such a great benefit to them. And the funder looked her in the eye and she said, how do you know? And she said, well, we just know because it's a really good program and the kids really like it. And she said again, how do you know? And so that showed us that, all right, we need to develop some specific tools to evaluate this program. How are we going to know that these kids learned anything? What did they learn? So this piece of the proposal is simply saying we're going to use pre and post surveys, or we're going to hire an outside evaluator, or we're going to do interviews with people. That's how we're going to know whether we met our outcomes. Next slide. Another very important component of a grant proposal is your budget, as we mentioned earlier, and attachments. Pretty much every funder is going to want to see a budget, not only for the project, but also for your organization. And basically, usually they will just accept your own simple income and expense budget for the project. However, some may have their own formats that they want you to use. And if that's the case, be sure to use their formats, because they will just not look at your proposal if you're not using their tool. So you want to be sure to include everything you can think of in your project budget, if it is a project that you're doing. From shipping, installation, things like that. If there's any ancillary costs that you might not be thinking of. Another example I can give of this is one time I was writing a proposal for an organization that needed to do replacement windows in a building they had. The windows were old and didn't fit well, and they were losing a lot of heat out of the windows in the winter. And so they needed those double pane replacement windows. And we got the $25,000 for the replacement windows. And then the maintenance guy came to me and said, oh, you know what we forgot? We forgot we needed to hire an installer to put these windows in, and that's going to be another $10,000. Well, can I tell you how long it took me to get that $10,000? And if we had asked for 35, the funder would have given us 35. So it's an example of just an ancillary little, it wasn't such a little cost, but think of everything you can to make your budget, as complete as possible. And be sure, this may sound stupid, but unless you're using an Excel spreadsheet with formulas, be sure the numbers add up correctly. There's nothing that will put a funder off more quickly than a budget that doesn't add up. Funders will also ask for attachments. And this is just another way of telling your story. It's another opportunity to educate them about what you do. Usually they're very specific about what they want, especially on the online formats. They'll give you a list of things to upload into the format. Generally, they're all pretty much the same. Typical ones are, again, the budgets. They're going to want your IRS 990 form, the financial reports. They're going to want your audit if you have one. They're going to want a strategic plan. And if you don't have one, they're going to want an explanation for why you don't have one. They're going to want your 501c3 letter from the IRS, certainly, a board of directors list. And some online formats will also give you the opportunity to upload other things to sell your case or to sell your organization. So you can upload newspaper articles or photographs or other kinds of things, testimonials about your programs, other kinds of things that might not fit in the proposal format, but that would help educate the funder about how wonderful you are. Next slide. In paper proposals, you always need to use a cover letter. And some online proposals will actually allow for a cover letter. And if you have that opportunity, you want to, the cover letters can be really nice because they allow you to talk about a few things that may not fit into the actual proposal. So if you have the opportunity to do a cover letter, that's a really good thing. You want to start with, if it is a prior foundation, a prior funder of yours, that they've already either expressed interest or they've made a visit or even they've made a grant. Of course, you want to start with thanking them for that, or if they've talked to you on the phone, thank you for the phone conversation or the email that they sent you, whatever. And then you want to go right into, our request is for a $5,000 grant to cover blah, 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 blah. You want to start right away. Don't bury the request further down in the letter. Just start right off with what you need. And then link that to their guidelines. Say this is consistent or congruent with the blah, blah, blah foundation's interest in sponsoring local history and fostering civic engagement. And in the second paragraph, just a brief explanation, one sentence each, about the need, the project, the outcomes. The third paragraph, you could put in something sort of motivational. paint the picture, try to get them a little bit more jazzed about reading the proposal, because most likely they're reading this first. And then at the end, you simply close and say, thank you so much for reading this over. We really appreciate your attention. This is the person to contact, which would also probably be in the cover sheet if they had one, but it never hurts to repeat it. And if there's anyone in your network, and that's why the CCBCC here is at the bottom of this slide, if there's anyone in your network who knows someone at the funder, send them a copy of the proposal and ask them to advocate for you with the organization. Ask them to make a phone call, a letter, a meeting, bring them for a site visit, get them engaged. This is such a critical part of the process to be successful, and it's going to really, really help. And it's actually a fairly easy thing for a board member or a committee member to do. They're not doing the scary, scary thing of asking for money. They're simply contacting their friend and saying, I know that our development person submitted a proposal to you. Could I answer some questions? Or would you like to come out and get more interested? That personal connection makes a big difference. I had one board member once who called a funder and they said they had thrown the proposal out. It was in the trash, but they pulled it out because the guy called and we got the money. So it's well worth it wherever you can to engage your network. Next slide. And then site visits. Some funders still today do site visits. Many will come out, they'll come out before they make the grant, or sometimes they come out afterwards to see what's gone on and to see how it went. Generally speaking, if you can get a site visit before they make the grant, you're pretty guaranteed you're going to get the grant. I've only had one situation where I had a site visit from the funder who loved the project and loved what we were doing, and then we didn't get the money. Basically, you can be pretty sure it's a very good indicator of some serious interest. And what I think, and I've done a lot of site visits as well, and what I recommend if you get the opportunity for a site visit is to ask your visitor when they get there, what do they need? What's their agenda? How much time do they have? What would they like to see? Do they want to sit in the office and take some notes and ask you questions? And I've had site visitors who want to do that. They've got very specific questions they need answered. Do they want a tour of your building, your facility? Do they want to see your program in action? Ask them what they need first. And even though we all have a tendency as organizations, as nonprofit leaders, when we get excited about something, or in particular, we get nervous about something, we tend to motor mouth and talk endlessly and not come up for air. It's really important to pause and stop and let the site visitor ask questions and ask them questions to draw them out, because you are going to learn more from listening to them than you are about communicating your great project. You want to really listen to them, find out what their concerns and interests are, because then you know how to address them. If they don't tell you, you don't know what's going on in their head. So the more you know what they're thinking, the more likely you're going to be able to come up with some content that's going to sell your project even more. And definitely have another person there with you, whether it's a board member or a key volunteer or someone who participates in your programs. And that's another reason to have two people there, so that when one person maybe is engaging in the conversation, the other person can be listening. I mean, it's really important because the information you can find learn from the funder by listening, or from any donor for that matter, the more you can learn from them by listening is gold, because that will then allow you in the future to tailor other kinds of requests to them that really fit what they're interested in. And then you're going to be more likely to get a larger gift, to get a gift, period, but even to get a larger one. If you get a grant, there is a certain element of course, ethics and accountability and reporting. As I mentioned earlier, some funders are going to want maybe a 6-month report. Most of them will require a 12-month report with a budget. And here's where you get the chance to tell them what a wonderful job they did giving you the money and all the great things that you did as a result of the grant. And you want to meet these deadlines very, very carefully. The ethical part of this is, if for some reason, and this has happened to me a couple of times, if for some reason you get the grant and something happens and either you can't deliver the program, or as many times as I've done when I really needed the money, I would put out proposals to like 2 or 3 foundations, hoping we'd get the money. And there've been a few times when I've actually gotten the money from several foundations, and it's been, I've got double the money or whatever. So what I recommend you do if something happens where either you're in that lucky situation or the situation where all of a sudden something shifted and this program is no longer feasible. Maybe you had a key partner or collaborator who's now all of a sudden dropped out. Who knows what's happened? Or something in the community has changed. Contact the funder and say, we've got this situation going on, and have in the back of your mind 2 or 3 other projects that you would like them to consider shifting their money to fund, and say, well, we've had, I said, we've had 3 funders pay for this refrigerator. Would it be okay if we bought a freezer with your money? Because it's a related thing. And the funder, generally what they've said, that I've only had one time where a funder said, well, send us the money back. Generally, they really don't want the money back because they've already gone through the grant making, and it's much easier to just change the subject than it is to give the money back. But I had one time when they wanted the money back, and that was fine. But others, their response was, wow, thank you for telling me. And I'm like, well, yeah, thank you for telling me. And sure, you can buy the freezer. That's a great idea. So that's the ethical piece of grants, in that these funds generally are restricted money, unless it's an unrestricted grant that you can use for anything. Generally, they're going to be restricted funds, and you have to honor them with the donor intent in that way. And lastly, the last thing to think about is stewardship. You need to consider foundations or organizational giving programs, government funders, corporate giving programs as major donors, because that's what they are. You need to treat them basically the same way you would treat an individual who just gave you $5 or $10 or $20,000. You need to keep them in the loop with your organization. Reach out to them when you're not asking for money. I think that's one of the biggest mistakes we make as development people or fundraisers or executive directors, is we only contact people when we want something. And it gets sort of old from the funder's perspective. So reach out to them with your newsletters, with pictures, with a holiday card, just something to say, hey, we just delivered this great program, and here's a picture of 5 kids who were fascinated with what they're learning at our site. Anything to keep them engaged, and you don't want to be overly doing this, maybe once or twice a year, something like that. You can also invite them to free cultivation events or free programs if you have them, because some staff or trustees may come. If you invite them as like you want to comp them for a dinner or something like that, many foundations will not come because they consider that an ethical problem, and so they won't come. But if it's a free educational event or a community event or a celebration, invite them. At the very least, they know what you're doing. And again, you're contacting them, not asking for something, but offering to give them something. And keep them informed, keep them in touch. Okay, so that's the wild, wacky world of grant writing and grant making and grant seeking in 55 minutes. We want to go to the next slide, Beth? There are some other materials in the next one after that. The rest of this PowerPoint, which you will get, is all kinds of tools to help you in your fundraising initiatives. Here's just a checklist of readiness that you could look down and say, do we have most of these things in place? And if we do, that's going to help address that issue that we talked about right at the beginning, about addressing concerns and issues that funders have. Next slide. And this is a sample letter of that you could use, some or all of it, in terms of recruiting people to help you fundraise, to help you promote your materials and your programs as volunteers. The next slide. And this one is about how to make that case for funding, which we talked about. What's the need? Why is it important? What are we going to do? The budget. Who else is involved in this? The other kinds of program details that we talked about in more detail earlier. But this is just a quick summary for you to refer to. Next slide. Then there's a sample case statement here, which is basically a fancy term meaning how to explain your program and your project, what you want to do, just to give you an idea of the kinds of concepts that would go into a proposal. It's a sample that you could use. Next slide. And again, this is a summary, the keys to successful fundraising that you need. We all need compelling purposes, solid plans, and that there's leadership and engagement. It's like sort of a summary of all the things we've talked about, but sort of in bullet points. Next slide. And this is a sample fundraising plan, because again, developing a fundraising plan, looking at how much money do we need to raise for 2026 activities? Where's it going to come from? When's it going to happen? Who do we need? What kinds of resources do we need to make this happen? So you've got financial goals, some of the, what are the resources? How much time is it going to take? Next slide. There's a little more about it. Here's a different way of looking at it and getting sort of drilling down and getting even more granular. We need 5 individual volunteers, the average donation of $2,500. We're probably going to get 3, $7,500, this kind of thing. It allows you to really break it down. But the nice thing about this chart that it also shows you is where we need to be spending our time. You need to be spending most of your time with those medium and large donors, because that's where the bulk of your funding is going to come from. As you can see in the small categories, we need the small donors, but you don't want to be spending a ton of time with them. Next slide. And here's an action step, an even more granular fundraising plan as an example that you could use and perhaps change around, but utilize for your own organization in terms of how to raise the funds that you need to raise. Next slide. And that's a continuation of that, some more action steps, direct mail, social media, all of those things. Next slide. And that's it. And our next session, your next info session, is going to be in March, and it's going to be talking specifically about government grants. So if you're interested in looking for government grants, that would be a really good program for you to come to. So we're just about at the end of our time, but does anybody have a question that you'd like to either voice or that you'd like to, has anybody put anything in the chat? I haven't been looking.
Doesn't look like it.
Okay. Anybody have a question or a comment or observation about your experience or anything else we didn't cover?
Hey, Connie.
Hey.
I'm David. I'm with Chester County Planning Commission. Just 2 added comments, especially for folks who don't do grants regularly. I had the pleasure earlier in my career of working as a grant reviewer for a federal grant program. And 2 things to emphasize that, and I had problems signing on, so you might have said this. One is to read the directions and read the directions again, and then read the directions again, and then have someone read the directions for you. Is that I can't tell you, in some cases, there were some provocative projects, but they didn't read the directions of
Yep.
what was required, or they didn't answer the questions as requested, and we threw them out. So it goes back to like, is your computer plugged in when you've got computer program problems? The other thing that we saw is when you've got a grant where you're describing a problem, a need, and the grant will allow you to fund various components to successfully complete that need. We saw organizations that were not strategic, and the only way to describe it is that they threw everything but the kitchen sink into the proposal.
Yeah.
And as we were going through it, despite the language they used or what they thought, it was very transparent. And because they were trying to get stuff funded that really wasn't, that was tangential to what the actual needs were, we didn't approve it. So especially again, I saw for folks who saw a great opportunity, they went overboard, and that served to be detrimental
Yeah.
to them, and it wasn't funded. So just from personal experience, those
Mhm.
were two things I just wanted to share.
Mhm. Yeah, those are great points, David. Absolutely. We did emphasize quite a bit today about the importance of reading the guidelines and not arguing with them, even though we might want to, and just being real specific, because again, funders are just looking for an opportunity to discard your proposal. And there are a lot of other people out there who are reading the directions. So it's really important to do that and to be realistic for sure. Any other comments, observations, questions anybody wants to share? Okay, well, good luck.
Yes, thank you
Thank
so
you.
much. Thank you so much, Connie, for sharing. And
You're
I know
welcome.
for everyone on the call today, this is being recorded, and we can send that around to everyone here and everyone who wasn't able to join us so they can watch at their leisure, along with a copy of the slides, because I'm sure they'll be helpful to reference later.
Great.
Perfect.
right.
Hope to see you again next month for our next resource planning session.
Great.
That's right.
Take good care. Have a good weekend.
Thanks. Good luck,
Bye,
everybody.
everyone.